Hello, and welcome to the story of the first Pokémon Nuzlocke that I've ever completed. I've actually attempted two Nuzlockes before this one in Emerald and one in Leaf Green. While I did finish the game in Emerald, I broke so many rules along the way that I just don't really count it. I constantly caught Pokémon I wasn't meant to, I wiped to Norman and then just kept on playing instead of resetting, and then I went and caught a Sableye from a location I'd already caught a Pokémon from to use as a free pass. I refused to count one of my deaths because it was to a Wobbuffet, and I ended up using Rayquaza, which you can catch at level 70 during the main adventure, and was all around incredibly cheap. So, yeah, don't really count that one. In the Leaf Green one, I actually did really well for most of the run, aside from one point near the beginning where I nearly wiped and had to death fodder 3 Pokémon to a Bellsprout of all things, making it all the way to the Elite Four on my first attempt. But after a few poor decisions near the end of the game and a little bit of bad luck, I wound up wiping to the Champion, and was so put off that I never did another attempt. I'll probably go into more detail later, but this time it would be different. I wasn't going to break any rules, and I was actually going to keep going until I won. So I'm sure most people going out of their way to watch Nuzlocke videos already know how they generally work. But they can vary slightly depending on the person playing, so I'm going to go into my specific rules. If you somehow already know how I play, or you just don't care, you can skip to the timestamp shown on screen. So, the rules that make it a Nuzlocke. 1. The player has limited access to Pokémon, only being allowed to catch the first Pokémon they encounter in each new area, an area being defined by whatever it says in the top left corner of the screen. Gift Pokémon and field encounters are also allowed. Some people play with the rules that if an area has both random encounters and a gift Pokémon or a field encounter, you have to choose between them. Truly only one new Pokémon per area, no matter what. Personally, I think that's a bit unnecessarily restrictive. It didn't make much difference in this playthrough anyway. 2. The player has to nickname every Pokémon they obtain. 3. If a Pokémon faints for any reason, it is considered dead and must be boxed or released. And 4. If the player blacks out, they have to restart the game from the beginning. Then there's the rules that make it a hardcore Nuzlocke. The first of these is that the use of bag items during battle is banned. Obviously, Pokeballs are an exception. The second is that the level of the player's Pokémon is not allowed to exceed the level of the highest level Pokémon on the team of the next gym leader they haven't yet beaten. The cap is 14 until they've beaten Brock, 21 until they've beaten Misty, so on and so forth. If a Pokémon goes above the level cap, it must be boxed until the level cap is raised. And third, the game must be on set battle mode. Finally, there's a few additional rules that I've used for my personal playthrough, but generally aren't considered to be required. I was playing with Dupe's Claws, meaning I'm not allowed to own 2 Pokémon from the same evolutionary line, even if the one I already own is dead. By my rules, the only exception to this would be if it's a Pokémon with a split evolutionary path. Though if any Pokémon like this are obtained, they must take an evolutionary path that isn't taken yet. I also decided that, whenever I was presented with a choice between multiple gift Pokémon, for example the fossils, I would use a random number generator to determine which one I choose, essentially treating it like a random encounter. The only other thing to note is that FireRed and Leaf Green are games where your ability to complete the game is affected by how many different species of Pokémon you've caught. So I added a clause stating that if by some means I got to a point where I was out of new encounters and couldn't continue the game without catching more Pokémon, I could catch more for this purpose. Pokémon caught for this reason cannot be used for any other purpose. With all that over with, let's get into the game. So, I create a new save, get stopped by Professor Oak, and get taken to the lab. Here I was gonna have a segment dedicated to the ups and downs that would come with choosing each starter. Then I realized that that was pretty irrelevant because I wasn't actually choosing my starter. I ran my RNG and got Squirtle. I wasn't in a very creative mood at that moment, so I just named it Sheldon. 'Cause, Shell. I beat the rival with no problems, get Oak's parcel, and then begin catching my early game encounters. The thing with the early game Pokemon of Kanto is that most of them are kind of bad. Like, there's 1 or 2 that can be mildly helpful in a couple of scenarios, but you certainly aren't going to be finding any likely candidates for a late game team here. And you're probably going to be heavily reliant on your starter for quite a while. On Route 1 I caught a Rattata, which I was gonna name Chucky, like Chuck E. Cheese, but then I saw it was a girl. so I just named it Chuckette instead. I also caught a Pidgey on Route 2, which I forgot to name, so I just retroactively named it Bird since I wasn't really planning on using it. A Mankey on Route 22 that I named Dixie, and a Kakuna in Viridian Forest that I named Vanessa. I really didn't think any of these were going to be particularly helpful against Brock, so I focused mainly on training Sheldon. I wasn't too concerned. I got Squirtle, the speedrunner's choice, easily the best Pokemon for taking on the first gym. I then proceed to almost lose him to the first bug catcher in Viridian Forest. I think only one of them is actually mandatory, and it's the last one towards the end. Oh, actually, this could be a problem. Oh, fuck! Alright, shit. Okay, that's actually not good. What happened was, I entered the fight already not at full health, and then got poisoned by the Weedle first turn. I did have potions, but this was a hardcore Nuzlocke. I wasn't allowed to use them until I was back in the overworld. When the bug catcher sent out a second Pokemon, I realized that I just wasn't going to win the fight fast enough, and had to resort to using my other, underleveled, and also not at full health Pokemon to take down the Caterpie. It's very possible that I could have wiped if I hadn't gotten that crit with Chuckette. Looks like one of the early game Pokemon I caught actually got to be useful after all. I decided to avoid the rest of the bug catchers, barring one towards the end who was required, and once I got to Pewter City I started grinding Sheldon to the level cap. I needn't bother with the rest of my Pokemon for a reason that I'll show right now. Alright, and he didn't use Bide, so I'm definitely fine. Yeah. Yeah. If you pick Squirtle, Brock is so weak that it's actually kind of laughable. On the pretty uneventful trip to Celadon City, Sheldon evolved into Wartortle, and I also picked up Pudding the Jigglypuff on Route 3, Sonic the Zubat in Mount Moon, and Jessie the Ekans on Route 4. As well as a Dome Fossil, which is kind of a gift Pokemon, but it won't be usable for a very long time. These Pokemon, while still not amazing, remember Crobat isn't available in the main adventure of this game, were definitely a lot more viable as at least temporary team members, and the smart thing to do would have been to train them up so I wasn't relying completely on one Pokemon. I didn't do that. I waltzed right into Misty's gym and proceeded to take her on. I figured, I've got Bite, and I resist her moves, surely this won't be a problem. Staryu wasn't much of a problem, but it did get in a lot more damage than I was anticipating due to Misty annoyingly using a Super Potion. Starmie actually proved to be a bit of a threat, because it tanked the Bite a lot better than I thought it would. Not more than half, okay, that's actually kinda not good. I end up switching into Jessie to get off and Intimidate and try to lower its damage output. But then I needed a safe switch to get Sheldon back out there. You're level 4 and you have the wrong ability. Like, thanks for helping out at that one part, but you're kinda done now. So, first death of the Nuzlocke. Goodbye, Chuckette. You were somewhat helpful in that one fight against the bug catcher, but you were only level 4 and had the wrong ability, so that was probably about as helpful as you were gonna be. I send Sheldon back out there. Misty uses a Water Pulse that would have killed had she gotten a crit, but she doesn't, and I managed to get through. Okay, so I played that battle pretty recklessly, and if I had wiped there, it would have been pretty much entirely my own fault. So surely, I learned my lesson here and don't play so recklessly again, right? Well, no, as you'll see later. I do at least take the hint regarding leveling up the rest of my Pokemon, and I proceed up Nugget Bridge with a competently leveled team, though unfortunately I lost Sonic while trying to grind him. The rival battles you again here, but I wasn't really worried about him. One of his Pokemon can't even attack, and 2 of his other 3 are still unevolved. I do make a slightly reckless play by trying to start a rollout chain with Pudding. I realized too late it was probably a bad idea, especially when the Rattata gets a crit quick attack and nearly kills her, but thankfully it worked out. I get through the rest of Nugget Bridge without much trouble, though repeatedly getting poisoned got a bit annoying, and then a whole bunch of new encounters became available to me. I caught an Oddish on Route 24, which I named Petunia. I also tried to catch an Abra on Route 25, but it teleported away. On the way south, I paralyze a Guts Machop because I'm stupid, but luckily I don't get punished for it. Then I accidentally kill a Meowth on Route 5, but then ran into another one on Route 6 and successfully catch this one. And I forget to nickname it. It was meant to be... I don't know, whatever, I'm not using it. Finally, after getting to Vermilion, I head east and also get Trifecta the Diglett and Dr. the Drowsy. I do have to be a little careful around this part of the game because Surge's level cap is only a little bit higher than Misty's, and there are a lot of trainers in this area. I battle the rival again aboard the SSN, and this time his team is actually considerably more threatening, with his Kadabra and Hyper Fang Raticate outpacing and outdamaging most other Pokemon that are available this early in the game. I have to switch around and use status moves a whole bunch, but I managed to get through the battle without any serious scares. So, remember what I said about how I should have learned my lesson earlier not to make any more stupid reckless plays? Well, it was around this time that I realized I'd forgotten to pick up the Magikarp the guy sells you in the Route 4 Pokemon Center. I could have just gotten the old rod and fish for one, but I kind of wanted to head back anyway to pick up the old Ember and the optional HM for Flash, so I decided to make the trip. The thing is, without Fly or Surf, the only way to get back to the other side of Mount Moon is through Diglett's Tunnel. Most of the Pokemon in here are pretty low-level Diglett, but you do have a 5% chance of running into a Dugtrio. And because for some reason the Dugtrio that live in this cave are all between levels 29 and 31, you can't ward them off with repels, and it would also be a pretty big problem if I happen to run into one. Plus, Dugtrio can have this ability called Arena Trap, which prevents you from running away or switching out. I did think of all of this, but then I decided to go ahead anyway. On the way to Pewter, I run into one Dugtrio. I was able to run away, but it takes me 2 turns to pull it off. While in the area, I pick up the Flash HM, the Old Ember, and the Magikarp, which becomes the 3rd Pokemon in this attempt that I forgot to nickname, and then try to make the trip back to Vermilion. The convenient route through Diglett's Cave, of course, not the longer but safer route back through Mount Moon. Seriously, what was I thinking? On the way back, I run into another Dugtrio, and once again it takes 2 turns to successfully run away. Then I run into a 3rd Dugtrio, and this one prevents me from running away with Arena Trap. What happened next was something I kind of saw coming, but it still made me yell so loud my mic gave out. You've got a oh, for fuck's sake, right. You can't even switch. I forgot it was just you can't run away. Well, that sucks. I might wipe to this thing. I didn't end up wiping to it, or even losing any more Pokemon, but it's always pretty devastating when you lose your starter in a Nuzlocke, especially this early in the game when you're relying on it so hard. It's not like Sheldon would have been particularly helpful in the next 2 gyms, which were Electric and Grass, but Blastoise is probably the best starter to have in the late game. So, think I learned my lesson not to play so recklessly yet? Not even close. The very next thing I do is try to fight some of the trainers on Route 11, and I wind up fighting this worker right here. Now, I'm pretty familiar with this game, so I knew exactly what he had on his team. He had 2 Magnemites and a Magneton. For some reason, I figured that even though I had no super effective types or moves in my party, I wouldn't have any trouble with him. Obviously, I was wrong and I have no idea why I thought that, and I wound up nearly wiping to him. I managed to avoid losing any Pokemon, but only barely. Oh, and then I lose the Magikarp without a nickname while trying to grind it. So now, it was time to take on Lieutenant Surge. If you're wondering why I have only 5 Pokemon with me in the gameplay footage, it's because I accidentally got into a battle with one of the trainers in Surge's gym, and Dixie wound up going over-leveled, and I didn't bother replacing her. I do his incredibly irritating puzzle, and only realize after I've completed it that I forgot to heal. I really didn't feel like doing the puzzle again, so I just entered the fight without full health on one of my Pokemon. I highly doubted it would make much of a difference anyway. Trifecta managed to make quick work of Surge's first 2 Pokemon, but when Raichu came out, I knew it had Quick Attack and that Trifecta was really frail, so I decided to switch into Petunia. Then, this started happening. No, don't be doing this. Don't be doing this. I also found out that gym leaders carry full heals in this game, which I legitimately never knew. So even if the Petunia can't... What the fuck?! Since when did the gym leaders in this game use full heals? Petunia got paralyzed and my moves were starting to miss a lot, but the fight was probably still winnable, but then Surge used a super potion. Things started to go downhill pretty quickly after that. This fucking thing. Like, can we just not teach NPC trainers these moves? Can we just not do that, please? Man, I love Double Team. Love Double Team. Such a fantastic addition to the game. Right, now with your attack lowered a bunch, it should be less risky for Trifecta. And of course he gets a crit. Alright, I might wipe to this. Why did he have to have the super potion as well? That is just too much. Like, the full heal was bad enough. The super potion, that's just bullshit. Even if I win, I'm probably losing Pokemon here. Alright, well, there goes one. Yeah, I'm probably losing my whole team here. Alright, there goes another. Like, come on, man! Really not much I could do. Like, seriously, if I could have just hit one of the times that it fucked me. Right, I'm wiping. I'm wiping. Just a bunch of fucking terrible luck. Right. So, yeah, going in without full health probably didn't make much of a difference, but in the opposite way that I'd hoped. So ended my first attempt, and as you can probably tell in the video footage, I was pretty mad. All of the terrible plays and decisions I made during that attempt, and what screwed me over in the end was something that wasn't even really my fault. Maybe I could have played around it a bit better, but Double Team is easily the cheapest move in all of Pokemon, and I hate both using it and having it used against me for that reason. But whatever, I'm not gonna bend the rules just because there's a part of the game I don't like. I created a new save and started over. For a while, aside from nearly losing the first rival battle, my second attempt at early game Kanto was a lot less eventful than the first, largely because I finally took the hint from that Magaton battle and began playing a lot more carefully. I roll for my starter again and this time get Bulbasaur, which I name Frog Kid. I get very similar encounters for a while. I get another Rattata and another Mankey, and in Viridian Forest I get a Metapod instead of a Kakuna. I only got 3 because I accidentally killed my Route 1 encounter. Brock is no problem once again, and on Route 3 my encounters start to differ a bit. I catch a Spearow, which I named DeWalt, and in Mount Moon I catch a Paras and get the Dome Fossil. Also, this time I actually remember the Magikarp. I accidentally kill my encounter on Route 4 as well. When I battle the rival on Nugget Bridge again, I try to use DeWalt, but it's just not strong enough to take on the evolved Pidgeotto, so I switch into Frog Kid, and the fight goes smoothly from there. Once I get through Nugget Bridge again, I encounter another Abra, but this time I actually manage to catch it by putting it to sleep. I also get a Weedle on Route 25. Walt nearly dies again while preparing for her, but Misty ends up being incredibly easy with an Ivysaur on my team, and would have been even easier if he didn't annoyingly learn Razor Leaf one level past the level cap. I was feeling pretty good by now. I caught a few more Pokemon on my way to Vermilion, and I'd nearly managed to get caught back up to where I was with no deaths and a much better set of encounters. Yeah, a lot of them were the same, but this time I had remembered the Gyarados and Randy the Kadabra. These are both potentially really scary Pokemon when you see them against you in a Nuzlocke, and I had them on my side, so I was pretty confident. And then I wind up losing them both to the rival on the SSN. Basically, what happened was, I made one pretty poor play, and the RNG decided to punish me for it as hard as possible. Here's how the battle went. Remembered gets through the rival's first two Pokemon with little issue. The rival then sends out his Kadabra. I decide to send in my own, figuring it to be the safest play. His Kadabra speed ties me, even though it's lower leveled, and also does more damage than I was anticipating. I'm guessing I got pretty unlucky with nature and IVs. And it's playing really annoying, constantly spamming disable, but things still look fine. Randy's outpacing its damage output, and managing to disable its confusion as well. But then, when I get to the point where one more hit would have killed, Randy gets disabled again, and then confused. After one turn, I realize this is looking pretty bad, and here's where I make my bad play. The smart thing to do here would have been to switch into Nat the Metapod in order to sack it, so I can get a safe switch into one of my other Pokemon. In fact, I probably should have done that a turn earlier. But I was slightly panicked in the moment and didn't play the smart way, so instead I swapped right into DeWalt. The Kadabra then does more than half, and will definitely outspeed the next turn. By this time I realize what the smart play was and do it, but now pretty much all of my Pokemon are in a potentially lethal damage range from this thing. First I try Randy, now no longer confused and disabled due to switching out, but he loses the speed tie and gets killed. My next choice is Remembered, who I was sure could take a hit, which he does, but I really didn't want him taking any more damage before the Charmeleon because he's the Pokemon I was relying on for it. Despite the extra damage, Remembered manages to get a lot of damage on Charmeleon without taking much himself, due to outspeeding and also flinching one turn. It gets to the point where I figure Remembered can safely take one more hit before I'm forced to switch out. I knew once Charmeleon was at low enough health, even Frog Kid would be relatively safe. Then Charmeleon uses Ember, and it crits, which Remembered survives because it was in a safe range, and then it gets burned. Like, come on. The chance of a critical hit and a burn happening on the same turn is around 2%. I end up beating the Charmeleon, but I just lost two really solid team members. I doubted they, especially Remembered, would have been amazingly helpful in Surge's gym, but at least I wouldn't be taking him on with a single Pokemon, basically. I tried training up Thrixie the Mankey and Quadfecta the Diglett as replacements, but they both wound up dying to random Pokemon because they were just too frail. And I really doubted DeWalt was going to be much help here. I just gave up trying to train anything else after those two because Frog Kid nearly went over the level cap. If I wasn't able to use him for Surge, I would have no chance. Eventually, I begrudgingly started my rematch with Surge, fully expecting to wipe again. Also, sorry about the gameplay here, I'm a total noob at OBS and didn't realize that changing the size of window would mess up the recording. For a while, it looked like history was repeating itself. I get through Voltorb and Pikachu just fine, but then Raichu comes out and immediately starts spamming Double Team again. I also try using Sleep Powder again for some reason, even though I knew about Full Heal by now. My new strategy becomes to use Leech Seed, so I can at least get some damage on it every turn, as well as some sustain for Frog Kid. It takes like 5 turns, during which Raichu just keeps racking up more Double Teams, but eventually I get it to hit. However, I'm still not that confident. I am slightly outpacing its damage, but Surge still has that Super Potion, and with the constant double teams, I'm just not able to get in a hit. Eventually, this happens. If I hit Razor Leaf this time, it will die, so that would be very convenient. Alright. Got lucky for once this run, but goddamn, I had a Gyarados and a Kadabra. I had a good team, and I just, got so unlucky in that rival battle. So I win, though as you can see in the footage, I'm not able to be that happy about it. It was still such a cheap, stupid battle, and I was still salty from my really unfortunate rival battle on the SSN. I also wasn't really in the clear yet, because I basically didn't have a team at that point, and it was a while before I had any more decent encounters. I can't even catch anything on Route 9 because it's all duped out. I allowed DeWalt to evolve because it finally learned Aerial Ace, which for some reason only Spearow can learn and not Fearow, but not before she was nearly killed again by some random trainer's Charmeleon. And I end up having to sack Jessibel, the male Ekans, just to keep her alive. I get a few unremarkable encounters on the rather irritating trip to the mid-game area, during which I have to navigate Rock Tunnel without Flash because I am not making the Diglett's Cave mistake again. DeWalt is burned pretty much the whole time, and Frog Kid once again comes dangerously close to going over the level cap. Though at least it wouldn't have been nearly as devastating if it happened this time. But I managed to make the rest of the trip without getting into any more serious danger. The next encounter that I was really hoping to get was a Growlithe. I had 2 guaranteed ones on Route 7 and 8. I encounter the one on Route 8 first. I use Sleep Powder. I use a Pokeball. It breaks out. I try and weaken it with Leech Seed. I miss. And then I miss again. I finally hit it on the 3rd turn, but then it wakes up, and then it roars. Well, that's annoying. I then encounter my other one on Route 7. I use Sleep Powder. It misses. And then it misses again. And then it roars. Well, that's even more annoying, and that's also pretty much my only opportunity for a Fire-type miss, because the only other ones in this game are Rapidash, who doesn't become available until after beating the 7th gym, and Flareon, which I'm not getting because A, it kinda sucks, and B, I have different plans for the Eevee that I pick up in Celadon. I named the Eevee Thor, planning to evolve it into Jolteon, but unfortunately I can't evolve it until after I've beaten Erica, because it doesn't learn Bite, which I really want on it, until 1 level past the level cap. Oh, that's twice now. I train up Tweety, the Pidgey I caught way back on Route 2, to use as safety, but thankfully Erica goes really smoothly. Now, if you're wondering why I've got Pokemon Showdown running in the background, it's because, rather annoyingly, I forgot to hit record, much to my chagrin after I found out. You're fucking kidding me. Alright, so... I've already beaten Erica. Only just now realized that I never hit record. Are you actually serious, man? The great thing about having beaten Erica is that the level cap goes way up to 43, so it'll be a long time before I have to worry about it again. Team Rocket HQ is pretty uneventful, as most of the Pokemon in there are very weak. Even Giovanni is defeated in like 4 turns. I also evolve Thor into Jolteon once he hits level 30, and now things are actually starting to look a lot better in terms of my team. Jolteon is one of the absolute best Pokemon for taking on the main adventure of Kanto, and just to illustrate why, here's how the battle against the rival in Pokemon Tower went. Jolteon really does just destroy so much of the rival's team if you pick Bulbasaur. Because even its Pokemon that resist electric-type moves, like Jolteon can learn Bite and just do that. Jolteon is like almost just an essential Pokemon for any team in this game. Like, it's just so good. Let's go for a flinch. And there you go. Only one of his Pokemon even got in an attack. Thor basically annihilates all of Pokemon Tower, gaining a lot of special EVs as a nice bonus, and as a reward I get the Pokeflute. Now, here's a pretty key encounter. You get 2 guaranteed Snorlax, one on Route 12 and one on Route 16. But guaranteed is probably a pretty strong word, because Snorlax is pretty difficult to catch, and can also absolutely decimate your team if you're not careful. I'm just glad it doesn't have Belly Drum or Body Slam when you encounter it, both of which it can learn in this game. Wow, 2 crits in a row. Come on, man. It would be a bit annoying to have to come back later, because that would mean I'd have to grind it a lot more. Yes! Alright, instant add to team. Alright, so pretty quickly, this attempt had gone from near dead, to salvageable, to really, really good. I named the Snorlax Chestnut, and it was an instant addition to the main team. Snorlax has a few great things about it. It hits really hard, it has a very diverse move pool, but probably the best thing about it is that it's virtually unkillable. It takes hits like few other Pokemon in the game can, and has multiple useful moves and strategies for recovering health. Especially if you use the rarely used key item, the Item Finder, to pick up leftovers like I did. The next gym I was planning on fighting was Koga. He and Sabrina have the same level cap, so in a hardcore Nuzlocke they can be fought in either order, and I elected to fight him first because he's generally considered to be the easier fight. Especially since I was planning on going in underleveled to make sure I didn't go past the level cap while fighting him. He usually isn't too threatening, though there was one mildly concerning thing about his team. That being that his Coughings both know self-destruct, which can be a pretty scary move to be on the receiving end of in a Nuzlocke. I wasn't sure I could 100% rely on any of my Pokemon for a guaranteed one-hit KO on them before they had a chance to explode. I decided to get a new team member, and I had to think. What's a fast, powerful special attacker who, at the same time, I wouldn't be too bothered if they were killed during the fight? I catch a Poliwhirl and trade it for a Jinx in Cerulean City. Jinx is a Pokemon that has a really weird and originally possibly quite racist design, and it's not exactly one of the most popular Pokemon out of the original 151. So on a normal playthrough, I don't think many people would think to use it. However, it does have a surprising amount of advantages. Ice Psychic gives really good coverage, especially in the older games. It's also surprisingly fast, and it learns a more accurate sleeping move than others like Sleep Powder and Hypnosis. It's a good choice for Koga's gym, but I'm not exactly expecting it to last. It can take special attacks really well, but its physical defense is basically non-existent. And of course, most of the Pokemon it's good against happen to be physical attackers. The strat with Jinx is to just use some powerful move and pray it one-shots, otherwise you're probably dead. By the way, when you receive traded Pokemon from NPCs, they're nicknamed by default, and because it's a traded Pokemon, you can't change this nickname. Want to know what the Game Freak staff came up with as a nickname for this thing? So, Zinx accomplishes exactly what she was supposed to, and Koga just doesn't stand a chance. The Silph-Co rival battle is also no problem. Thor gets through the majority of his team barely even taking any damage, and Zinx and Chestnut are able to finish it off after Thor gets paralyzed. I get Lyra the Lapras, and move on to Giovanni. For some reason, I actually have a bit of trouble with him this time. Zinx gets through his first two Pokemon with no issues, but after Kangaskhan comes out, I get a bit apprehensive since I don't feel like Zinx's moves will one-shot, so I wind up switching to Frog Kid. Kangaskhan then does Mega Punch, which does a lot more damage than I was prepared for and would almost definitely have killed Zinx, but I hit with Sleep Powder and then feel safe. Unfortunately, I forgot that Kangaskhan has the Early Bird ability, so it wakes up almost immediately and starts attacking again. This time I set up a Leech Seed, and after it uses Tail Whip, I get nervous again and switch into Chestnut. Chestnut takes hits from Kangaskhan a lot better, and I feel that the mild danger is past. However, Nidoqueen also starts dealing a lot more damage than I was expecting, and to make matters worse, Chestnut gets hit with Poison Point, meaning he'd die in one more hit. Well, so much for being unkillable. I switch into DeWalt, and then she gets Poison Pointed as well. Another Body Slam would kill from this range, and I'm starting to run out of safe switches. I try going back into Frog Kid and go for Sleep Powder, which misses. Twice. I was fully expecting Frog Kid to be killed after the second miss, but thankfully, for some reason, Nidoqueen goes for Double Kick instead of the potentially lethal Body Slam. I guess it got a low roll on Body Slam that turn or something. After realizing it doesn't actually have a ground-type move, I decide that Thor is a safe switch, and he manages to finish it off, though not before also getting poisoned and taking a lot of damage from that. Wow, that was way more difficult than it should have been. I end up using the PC that's in the president's office for some reason to heal. Probably about the one time anyone has ever used that PC for any practical reason. Like, seriously, why is it even there? Finally, it was about time to wrap up the mid-game and fight Sabrina. Her gym also has a really annoying puzzle, and I don't have much of a strategy for getting through. All I really know is that I have to get to the top left room and take the bottom left warp. Sabrina herself is a lot easier. Thor gets through her first 3 Pokemon no problem, and then her Alakazam isn't able to do a thing to Zinx. After she's beaten, I get Surf from the Safari Zone and get ready to enter the late game. First, I had some business to attend to. While going around catching whatever encounters I hadn't yet, I wanted to do some encounter routing for a very specific reason. A little earlier, I'd spent like half an hour searching for a 1% encounter Psyduck by fishing on Route 12. There were almost definitely easier ways to get one, but that was the first route I found where it was guaranteed, as every other possible fishing encounter had been duped out. Then, while doing this round of collecting my encounters, I searched for another 1% encounter, this time a coughing while surfing in Celadon City. This was knowing that there was a very real possibility that it would just self-destruct when I did find one, but thankfully that didn't happen. I did all of that for the purpose of maximizing my chances of finding a Growlithe in the Pokemon Mansion. Even with coughing duped out, it still wasn't guaranteed. I still had a 25% chance of encountering a Grimer first. But thankfully, I found a Growlithe first, and knowing wild ones will no longer know Roar at this level, catch it without much of an issue. And then I immediately box it. Yeah, the only reason I did any of that was to spite that species of Pokemon for roaring me twice earlier. I was still salty about that. Because, let's face it, fire types really aren't that helpful at any point in this game other than the fight against Erica. I had nothing to gain from this other than some closure regarding my conflict with this little dog character in a video game. Arcanine is generally just a really good Pokemon though, so I guess it would have been good to have as a backup if, say, something stupid were to happen to one of my main Pokemon in the near future. Nothing of the sort did happen, but I suppose it was good to have in case it did. I also decided to add a new team member, Reaper the Kabutops. Not the most helpful water type in the game, but it does quad resist fire and also resist flying, which may be very helpful in the upcoming gym, as well as against a certain fully evolved starter Pokemon that was largely responsible for ending my original attempt at this in Leaf Green. In the meantime, I'm thinking it may be about time to retire DeWalt. She was helpful in some early and mid-game fights, but like pretty much all of the early game Pokemon of Kanto, Fearow can really start to lag behind the rest of your team once you get into the late game, so I'm thinking that once I get out of this dungeon, I'll just box her, so I can make room for Lyre the Lapras, who I plan on adding soon, as well as for another encounter that I've been saving for when the level cap will let me fully evolve them. And also, just so her contribution can respectfully conclude, without having to let her die. Oh wait, never mind, she just got killed by some random trainer's Charmeleon. I mean, wow, I know it was a crit, but it wasn't even a fully evolved Pokemon. You really were starting to fall behind. Anyway, moving on to Blaine. I lead off with Frog Kid to take the Intimidate, then I switch to Reaper, who just obliterates the rest of Blaine's team. He isn't the hardest hitter in the world, especially since I haven't taught him Rock Slide since I wasn't sure he was going to be a permanent team member, but there was just nothing that any of Blaine's Pokemon could do. The worst thing was Arcanine's Bite. After beating Blaine, in FireRed and Leaf Green they added this little segment where you go with Bill to get a brief preview of the post-game area. It's really just to fill some time between the 7th and 8th gyms. Nothing particularly exciting happens here, though there was one random trainer who kind of tipped me off to the fact that unless I led with Zinx, my team wasn't particularly well equipped to deal with fighting types. Jeez. Okay, Machop and Machoke are actually a little bit scary when I'm not leading with Zinx. So, that could potentially be a problem. Though, some of my stupidity from earlier did come back a bit, and I once again paralyzed a Pokemon with Guts, so if that Machoke had given me trouble, it would have been at least partially my own fault. I have to remember to stop doing that. I also get to Mount Ember and realize that I never went back to Fuchsia to get strength, so I guess we'll just have to abandon that guaranteed Machop that I was probably never going to use anyway. But aside from those minor hiccups, the Sevi Islands quest is pretty uneventful, and I return to Kanto to take on the 8th and final gym. And it's really anticlimactic, it's a total cakewalk. Lyra one-shots his entire team with Surf, only Dugtrio manages to get in a little bit of damage due to outspeeding it. I kinda wish the NPCs in Pokémon had dialogue that changed, depending on, like, how close the battle was. Like, he says that was a truly intense fight. No, it wasn't. It was a landslide. So this one could know Superpower, but I think that just one-shots, yeah. I don't think Superpower would have one-shot anyway. I've got a lot of HP. Maybe a crit would have one-shot. It's actually kind of crazy how much easier the late game of Kanto has been so far in comparison to the early and mid game. I haven't run into a single Pokemon that's given me any proper trouble since that first Nidoqueen. Will the penultimate rival fight change that perspective? Well, sort of. I was anticipating a bit more trouble here, because there actually are a few Pokemon on his team. Did I really not heal? At least it's only PP I'm missing, god damn. I just saw all the full health. Good thing I wasn't using Thunderbolt. Yeah, it's not free with Thor anymore because now he actually has some Pokemon that scare it. Like, Rhyhorn is usually the least threatening member on his team, but it's annoying because now I actually have to switch because of it. Aw, are you kidding me? Aw, dude, that does nothing. Crit, I mean... It... Oh! It didn't fall asleep because I paralyzed it with Body Slam! Are you serious, man? I should be good now. Of course, man. A Psychic will kill it now, but, like... Crit would've killed there, man. But aside from one moment where Zinx would have died if a move had crit, the fight was a lot more annoying than scary. At least I didn't lose any Pokemon, but like, that fight should not have been that difficult. I just got so unlucky with getting paralyzed there. Like, why did he choose that move? And once again, I forgot to go back to Fuchsia and get strength. After finally remembering to do that, I was pretty much free to head right on up to the Indigo Plateau, because for some reason not a single one of the trainers in the Kanto Victory Road is required. Me not taking advantage of this fact is actually kind of what started the chain of events that lost me my original Kanto Nuzlocke. It was a total butterfly effect. I decided to fight a pair of optional Victory Road trainers in a double battle. I attacked the wrong Pokemon first, the Nidoking one-shots my Jinx, who was also named Zinx, by the way, because that trait is literally the only way to get a Jinx in all of Kanto, so if you ever want to use that Pokemon, you're stuck with that god-awful nickname, with Megahorn. I have to take on the Elite Four without a solid answer to Lance's Dragonite. I end up being forced to sack my Jolteon to get through, and my remaining 3 Pokemon, Venusaur, Fearow, and Sandslash, just couldn't put a dent in the rival's Charizard. So I wipe. Not this time, though. I avoid every single trainer on the way through. Then, I throw my Master Ball at an Onix, and begin preparing to take on the Elite Four. Now that my level cap was 60, equal to the level of the final Elite Four member, not the champion, one of my first steps was getting the final Pokemon that I planned on adding to my team. Much earlier in the game, when I arrived at Celadon City, I ran the RNG to determine which Pokemon I would be allowed to get from the game corner. By the way, does anybody else find it a little bit weird that we're still allowed to buy Pokemon from here even after it's found out that it's basically an illegal poaching operation? And I actually got Dratini. though I decided I didn't want to add it to my team until the level cap was high enough for it to fully evolve. Because until it fully evolves at level 55, it's pretty much unusably terrible. But once Titan fully evolves, honestly, I'm overhyping it a bit. In this game, it's actually pretty disappointing. The main reasons I added it were that I thought it made a pretty good meat shield because it resists a lot of common types, and also because I wanted a Pokemon on my main team that could use Fly, so I didn't constantly have to go back to the PC. As an attacker, I mean, look at that moveset. It doesn't even learn Dragon Dance in this game without breeding, and even if it did, the only moves that it has to take advantage of that massive attack stat are a few normal and flying type moves. And Earthquake, I guess, but at that point you might as well use that TM on something else. Still, I thought it would be good just to have another Pokemon that could hit pretty hard and wasn't easy to kill, though since I already had a full team of 6, someone had to be replaced. I considered my options, and I decided that it was time to retire Reaper. He'd done pretty well in a few battles, but now I had other Pokemon on my team that I was planning on serving as my counter to fire and flying types, and I figured they'd probably do a better job at it. I mean, look at this moveset. Forget Dragonites being bad, Kabutops doesn't even get any Rock-type moves till level 65, and can't even make use of its Water-type because all Water moves are special in this game. So, a bit belated, but I finally managed to retire a major team member without having to let them die. Oh wait, Lyra got crit and one-shot by a wild Primeape. I really thought it would be bulkier than that.
I don't think Superpower would have one-shot anyway. It got a lot of HP. Maybe a crit would have one-shot.
Never mind. Welcome back, Reaper. Well, that was stupid, but eventually I get a full team of level 60 Pokemon. Frog Kid the Venusaur, Thor the Jolteon, Chestnut the Snorlax, Zinx the Jinx, Reaper the Kabutops, and Titan the Dragonite. I finalized my movesets, buy far more healing items than I would ever need, and set off into the Elite Four. The Elite Four is usually one of the most dangerous parts of a Nuzlocke, because if one of your Pokemon faints, you can't just replace it. You have to continue on with only a partial team, until you win, or you die. Fortunately, most of the Kanto Elite Four aren't exactly known for being all that strong. Lorelei, I'm anticipating being a little bit annoying. Her Pokemon are all really bulky and have a lot of annoying moves for sustain, stalling, and chip damage. Fortunately, thanks to a good damage range on Dewgong and a crit that probably mattered on Lapras, all of her first 4 Pokemon go down to Thor in one shot. The only Pokemon that throws a wrench in the idea of a clean sweep is her Jinx, which has high special defense and the chance to put Thor to sleep once it gets to attack. I decide to switch to Chestnut just to play it safe, and while he does indeed get put to sleep, he's also got high special defense and has Thick Fat as an ability, so Jinx can't do a thing with Ice Punch. As a last-ditch effort, it goes for Attract, but it doesn't work out, and it dies quick after Chestnut wakes up. I ended up taking a net 7 damage during the whole battle. As for Bruno and Agatha, quite honestly, they're both total jokes if you have a fast Psychic type on your team like I do. They both only last as many turns as the amount of Pokemon they have on their teams. I have to say, I really was not expecting Zinx to be this important a member of my team. I knew her special attack and speed were really good by this game's standards, but her physical defense is so low, and because she has a mild nature, it's even lower than it is for most Jinx, so I was really expecting her to get screwed by that at some point. But everything just dies before it gets the chance. Like, I didn't think I'd be able to make this much use of her because her physical defense is just so bad, but, I mean, she doesn't get hit. Lance was the only member of the Elite Four that I was a little bit concerned about. I had to lead with Thor because there's basically no answer for his Gyarados, but then I would have to somehow get a safe switch on a team where virtually everything knew Hyper Beam, a move I was sure would one-shot many of my Pokemon, especially Zinx. Thankfully, one came pretty early on when the first Dragonair used Outrage. Outrage is a move that locks the user into using it for a few turns, and I was sure Zinx would be able to take a few of those no problem. I couldn't quite start a sweep because his next choice was Aerodactyl. The obvious choice here would be to switch to Reaper, but for some reason I elect to switch to Titan instead. I don't remember my thought process. Like, I wanted to paralyze it, but I'm not sure why I thought that was necessary, seeing as I had a Pokemon that resisted all of its moves, pretty much. And I wound up letting Titan take a hit that would have killed him if it crit, and it would have been entirely my own fault if he died there. Anyway, after that, I do make the obvious choice and switch into Reaper, who easily takes it down with Rock Slide. Then, his second Dragonair decides to use Outrage again, giving me another safe switch into Zinx, and allowing her to easily take down his remaining 2 Pokemon. Only one more battle, and my Pokemon FireRed Hardcore Nuzlocke will be done. Sort of, you'll see in a sec. Champion -2 leads off with his Pidgeot, which stands no chance against Thor. He then sends out his Rhydon, who poses a lot more of a threat than I thought it would, because a crit Earthquake or a Razor Leaf Miss could have resulted in Frog Kid's death, but thankfully neither of those things happen. He then goes for his Alakazam, who had pretty consistently been his most bothersome Pokemon in previous battles. Thankfully, unlike the battle at Route 22, Zinx is at full health, so I feel a lot safer sending her in against him. And since it doesn't use Calm Mind first this time, she's able to 2-shot it with Ice Punch. Then Gyarados comes out, and I try to put it to sleep so I can get a safe switch, but I quickly regret this decision when Zinx is almost killed. I'm clearly really underestimating Gyarados' strength here, because I assume that Thrash will at least do less than half to Thor, but a crit would have killed there too. Seriously, Gyarados would have been such a powerful ally, why did I have to lose it earlier? After Gyarados goes down, the rival sends out his Exeggutor, and I figure it won't stand much of a chance against Titan. And it wouldn't. Once I actually get to attack, that is. It uses Sleep Powder on Titan first turn, and it lasts almost as long as it possibly can, so that Egg Bomb actually starts to worry me a bit. Then, when I finally get in a hit, it's not quite enough to KO, and then he Sleep Powders me again. Eventually I give up on this nonsense and switch into Chestnut. It tries to Sleep Powder me for a third time, but thankfully this one misses. And it finally goes down to a Shadow Ball. At long last, the big bad Charizard comes out. And it's pretty anticlimactic because there's really not a lot it can do to Chestnut. I start a rollout chain, and it goes down to the second one. And the next one's gonna do more. If this hits again, we win. Yeah, that's not gonna cut it, cause Snorlax is high special defense and thick fat. Alright, we got it! Deathless Elite Four! So yeah, I got a little lucky in a few spots, and sure, I already said the Kanto Elite Four wasn't really known for being too difficult, but it still felt like an accomplishment to achieve a deathless run the very first time I got to the Elite Four in a hardcore Nuzlocke. However, this isn't quite the end. While the Nuzlocke is technically won, as an added bonus I wanted to see if I could also get through the postgame and the second round of the Elite Four. The thing about the postgame of Fire Red and Leaf Green is, it's not particularly long or particularly difficult. All you really have to do is collect some stones for the PC guy in the Sevi Islands and fight a few rockets along the way, most of whom have unevolved Pokemon in the level 40s, sometimes even 30s. So I wasn't really in any danger for the whole thing. Pretty much the one mildly interesting thing is some setup for the Johto games, and even then that's a story thing, not a gameplay thing. I'm really only catching my encounters for the sake of it as well, because most of them aren't that good, and even the ones that could be are really low leveled. I briefly consider adding a Skarmory that I found in the Seville Canyon, but in the end I decide to just take on the rematch with the same team that I used in the first round. I found a trainer in Seville Canyon who very conveniently has a Chansey and nothing else, allowing me to easily train most of my team up to the new level cap of 72. I wish there were more rematchable trainers with teams like this. I use a Gyarados trainer for Thor, and for Zinx I just use the rockets in the warehouse and finish off with my rare candies. For most of my team there was this Chansey trainer on the Sevi Islands who was super convenient, but I couldn't really use them for Zinx or Thor because Chansey has just ridiculous special defense, and these two just couldn't do anything to it. What am I doing? I have rare candies that I'm not going to be using for anything else after this. I buy a bunch more healing items completely unnecessarily, but it's not like I'm using this money for anything else, and I decide I'm ready to take on the Elite Four once again. The Elite Four, who sometimes act like they don't know me and sometimes they act like they do, it's very weird in this game, definitely have better teams during the rematch, and even assuming I win, I'm definitely not expecting to go deathless this time. Lorelei Slowbro is replaced with a Piloswine. And while individually Slowbro is easily the better Pokemon, my previous method of sweeping through most of her team with Thor now no longer works. I one-shot Dugong again, which kinda surprised me, but I have to switch to Chestnut when Piloswine comes out. It doesn't give Chestnut any trouble really, but now it has to deal with Cloyster, a total physical wall. He is able to get it to low health, but then I annoyingly have to deal with a 50-50 that always seems to go wrong. Do I assume she full restores and take the safe switch, or do I assume she won't and just go for it? It's at a bit of an awkward amount of health to assume either way, and sometimes the AI seemingly at random just won't heal when they usually would, just to mess with the player I guess. I wind up taking my guess and stay in, and of course, I guess wrong. Thankfully, I managed to paralyze it again, she doesn't use another full restore, and Jinx is no problem at all. That just leaves Lapras, and I decide to switch into Thor. A high damage range from Surf followed by a crit could be a bit concerning, but after I use Thunderbolt, I pretty much get her in a death loop. The AI will sometimes spam full restores for as long as they can, but if you can get them down to a healing range in a single hit, there's nothing they can really do to get out of it, they're just delaying the inevitable. And her Lapras, who I guess had some sort of realization, goes down. So now, we move on to Bruno, and while he still isn't especially difficult, he isn't completely free like he was before. Both of his Onix are now evolved into Steelix. He also, for some reason, still has two of them instead of replacing one of them with a Hitmontop. Why, Game Freak? Anyway, this means they can no longer be one-shot by an Ice-type move from Zinx, so I instead have to rely on the only Pokemon on my team that can use a special move that's super effective on them, Titan. Bruno certainly put up a much better fight than he did before, and I made one play that could have been really bad if it didn't work out. Oh shit, that was a really bad play actually. Oh shit. Okay, please don't use... Okay, it died. God damn, I saw it had counter in its moveset. If it used counter that turn, that would have killed. I was also a little scared of Rock Slide from Machamp, but Titan survives it with ease. He does nearly get killed by the next Steelix. I probably should have switched out before that, but thankfully I continue to avoid any bad luck with crits. Against Agatha, I don't change my lead, but I don't feel safe keeping Zinx out against Crobat, which now knows Shadow Ball and will almost definitely outspeed. Chestnut deals with it without much issue, and... Okay, thankfully this time I have a Pokemon with a move that can't miss, so I don't have to worry about Double Team. In fact, Titan easily takes care of the rest of Agatha's team, the one annoyance being a Deathloop with her Mischievous. Well, Titan, despite your lackluster moveset and attack-hindering nature, you're really proving yourself in this second round of the Elite Four. I'll issue an apology for basically using you as a HM slave for most of the postgame. Now, on to Lance. Once again, probably the member of the Elite Four I was most concerned about. I lead with Thor, just like last time, and Lance then sends out Aerodactyl. This thing now knows Earthquake, making it a lot more threatening than it was previously. I don't even really have a safe switch for it anymore, just a safest switch. I make a somewhat risky play and decide to start a rollout chain, but it looks like it's gonna work out. Then this happens. And I believe another one should kill. Aw, you hate to see that! Alright, well, might lose because of that. That's scary. At least if it does kill, I have a free switch. Oh. So, my first death in quite a while. I know I made this joke already, but so much for Snorlax being unkillable, I guess. Though that Omniboost followed by a crit was pretty damn unlucky. I was never gonna be surprised if Chestnut went down there with the whole rollout chain thing, but I was hoping it would at least take down more of Lance's team with it. And now I had a dilemma. Hyper Beam is supposed to force a user to recharge after being used, but in some of the older games it works a bit wonky, and I can't remember off the top of my head if A, it's the case in this game, and B, if it applies to opposing trainers. I probably should have looked it up, but I end up just guessing. And once again, I guess wrong. I'm not risking it. One death is enough this battle. Alright, should have sent in Zinx then. I take out the Aerodactyl, but now I need a safe switch to get one of my other Pokemon out there to deal with the Dragonite. I end up sending in Frog Kid with the intention of sacking him, as I'm not expecting him to be that helpful after this point. Who's gonna be least helpful in the battle against Blue? Alright, Frog Kid, think your time has come? But he proves surprisingly resilient, so I end up just putting the Dragonite to sleep and using that as my opportunity for a safe switch, and Reaper takes out the Dragonite no problem. Now here, I'm expecting Lance to send out his Kingdra, but instead he sends out his other Dragonite. Right, I forgot the second one knows Thunderbolt. Thankfully, this one doesn't know Earthquake and Reaper resists Hyper Beam, so I feel like it's okay to send in Zinx. I don't feel completely safe. I could still get screwed by a Paralysis from Thunderbolt, but thankfully that doesn't happen. And Zinx easily takes down the second Dragonite. Alright, we've got this fight with Lance under control. Despite my commentary, I'm actually not quite in the clear yet. His last Pokemon is kind of a wild card. Kingdra is a pretty annoying Pokemon to deal with in the older games, because here, its only weakness is Dragon. I decide to try and put it to sleep, and I miss. Well, I needed a safe switch anyway, and I don't expect Zinx to be too helpful beyond here, so I assume this was it for her. Oh shit! I use Lovely Kiss again, and it hits this time, and the following turn I use Perish Song, meaning it'll die in 3 turns no matter what. So now, regardless of what happens, I'm at least gonna make it past Lance. I switch into Reaper, it flinches on the one chance it gets to attack, and goes down to Perish Song. I've now made it to the champion again, with 5 Pokemon remaining. I proceed to heal, and for some reason leave the leftovers sitting uselessly on Chestnut instead of moving it to one of my alive Pokemon. Seriously, why did I do that? Anyway, the rival has 2 new Pokemon on his team in the rematch. He leads off with a Heracross, who, if you have a flying type, is so easy that it might as well be a 5v5 match. After that, he goes right into his Charizard, and while at first it looks like it's gonna be an easy 2-shot, unfortunately it gets some of its health back with a Citrus Berry, and I'm not confident that another Surf will kill it. Knowing it definitely won't use Earthquake that turn, I switch into Thor, who I know will take one of its other attacks pretty well because Jolteon has surprisingly decent special defense. He uses Thunderbolt, and that finishes off Charizard. The rival then sends in his... Gyarados? What? I was expecting his Tyranitar. I was a bit concerned about this Gyarados, and he just gave it to me. I remember watching a video a while back where it's explained that in Pokemon Emerald, the AI is programmed, for some reason, to switch in the Pokemon that has the best moveset and the worst typing, against the one that you currently have out. I feel like that's happened a few times in this challenge, like in that last battle against Lance. So now I'm wondering if the AI of some of the trainers is programmed that way in this game as well. His next Pokemon is the one that I expected him to send out last time, and I decide to switch into Titan because for some reason it doesn't have any Rock-type moves. Titan takes it down, though unfortunately he doesn't have much health left afterwards, and his next Pokemon is Alakazam, which is always his hardest Pokemon to switch into for me. After some contemplation, I decide that, while Titan had been very helpful in this second round of the Elite Four, his time had come. It's the last battle of the game, there was really no point in playing risky. Alakazam outspeeds and finishes off Titan. I send in Thor, hoping to just take it out quickly, and also because it knows Shadow Ball, which could be bad for Zinx if it decides to play Stolly, but I don't get the kill and don't get the flinch either. I expect Alakazam's next Psychic to finish off Thor, but he actually hangs on. Seeing one more attack of pretty much any kind will finish off this Alakazam, I decide to save Thor in case I need a quick finisher for the Exeggutor, and send in Zinx. knowing it'll be able to take one attack from Alakazam just fine. He full restores, but I know Ice Beam will do more than half, so I'm good. He decides to be annoying and hang on in a death loop for a while, but after he runs out of full restores, I'm on to his last Pokemon, Exeggutor. That death loop with Alakazam lasted so long that I was starting to wonder if the damage I took from the Sandstorm was going to be a problem. No, that's not going to happen. I'm going to use Ice Beam here, and even if shenanigans happen that cause me to lose Zinc Tears, Jolteon can just come in and bite. We got this. Alright! But it wasn't. And it was done. I'd beaten the Nuzlocke, and I'd beaten the bonus round. Again, it's not like FireRed and Leaf Green are especially difficult games, and I'm definitely expecting to have a lot more trouble in some of the other games in the series, but it was still nice to win a Nuzlocke for the first time. And yeah, I am planning on doing this for more games. Some of the other main series games for sure, at least one for each region, and then maybe I'll move on to some ROM hacks too. But for now, that's it. I am terrible at ending videos, so sorry if this seems kind of abrupt. Thanks for watching, goodbye.